Imagine a world where logic bends, reason collapses, and even the most basic truths can't be trusted. A world where a sentence can destroy itself just by existing. Welcome to the strange and unsettling domain of paradoxes, those mind-twisting riddles that challenge everything we think we know about reality, time, identity, and even language itself. In this video, we'll dive into 5 of the most fascinating and disturbing paradoxes ever conceived. Each one is like a crack in the foundation of our understanding, small but impossible to ignore. These aren't just puzzles, they're warnings, clues that the universe may not work the way we think it does. Let's begin. The first paradox on our journey is one of the oldest and most unsettling, the liar paradox. At first glance, it seems like a simple sentence. This statement is false. That's it. Just 5 words. But those 5 words unlock a logical trap that has haunted philosophers and mathematicians for over 2,000 years. Let's analyze it. If the statement is true, then what it says must hold. But what it says is that it's false. So if it's true, then it's false. But if it's false, then it's not true that it's false, so it must be true. This circular logic leads to an infinite loop of contradiction. The sentence cannot be true and it cannot be false. It exists in a limbo of logical instability. Why does this matter? It seems like just a linguistic trick, something you'd find in a philosophy class or a riddle book. But it's much more than that. The liar paradox exposes a fundamental weakness in our understanding of truth and language. It reveals that self-reference, the act of a sentence referring to itself, can break logic. In the 20th century, this paradox would shake the very foundations of mathematics. The logician Kurt Gödel, inspired by the liar paradox, developed his incompleteness theorems. He showed that in any sufficiently powerful mathematical system, there are true statements that can't be proven within the system. His proof involved constructing a mathematical statement that says, in essence, this statement is unprovable. Sound familiar? It's the liar paradox translated into mathematics. And it proved that no logical system can ever be both complete and consistent. This wasn't just a theoretical blow, it destroyed the dream of a perfect, airtight foundation for mathematics. People like Bertrand Russell and David Hilbert had hoped to build a logical framework where all truths could be derived from a small set of axioms. Gödel's result showed that such a dream was impossible. And it all started with a simple, paradoxical sentence. But the liar paradox doesn't just live in dusty math papers. It appears in computer science, in the design of artificial intelligence, and even in legal language. For example, imagine a contract that says, "This contract is invalid." What happens if you sign it? If it's valid, then it's invalid. But if it's invalid, then it's not binding, which might mean it's valid. Again, we're caught in a logical whirlpool. In AI, paradoxes like these pose serious risks. A machine learning model trained to evaluate truth statements could crash or behave unpredictably if fed paradoxical inputs. Self-referential loops are especially dangerous in recursive algorithms and natural language processing. It's not just a matter of philosophical curiosity, it's a practical engineering challenge. Some have tried to resolve the liar paradox by altering the structure of logic itself. One approach is to use 3-valued logic, which adds a third truth value, not just true or false, but also undefined. In this system, paradoxes like "this statement is false" are simply labeled undefined. It's a neat workaround, but it raises new questions. Can reality really be reduced to 3 states? What does it mean for something to be undefined in a universe where information is supposedly binary? Another solution is to create hierarchical languages. In these systems, a sentence can't talk about itself unless it's at a higher meta level. So ordinary sentences exist at one level, and statements about those sentences exist at another. The liar paradox is avoided because the sentence, "This statement is false," is now illegal. It tries to do something logically forbidden. But while this solves the paradox formally, it feels like cheating. It avoids the contradiction by rewriting the rules, not by understanding the paradox itself. And then there's the psychological angle. Why do we find the liar paradox so disturbing? Perhaps because it confronts us with the limits of our own cognition. We like to think of truth as binary, clear-cut and dependable. Paradoxes reveal that even the most basic ideas, true and false, can unravel when pushed too far. They remind us that our brains evolved for survival, not for understanding ultimate reality. In literature and film, the liar paradox appears as a metaphor for self-destruction and collapse. Think of a character who says, "I always lie." If he's lying, then he's telling the truth, so he must be lying. It's the perfect recursive trap. And it mirrors how humans often sabotage themselves with circular reasoning, conflicting beliefs, and contradictory identities. Even in theology, the liar paradox has played a role. Medieval scholars debated whether God could create a stone so heavy he couldn't lift it. It's another version of the same trap, a self-defeating proposition that exposes the boundaries of language, logic, and power. Ultimately, the liar paradox is more than just a trick of words. It's a window into the fragile nature of truth itself. It shows us that language, thought, and logic are not infallible instruments. They are tools with cracks, susceptible to collapse under pressure. And those cracks might be telling us something profound. That reality, at its core, may not obey the tidy rules we wish it did. The second paradox is as haunting as it is mind-bending: the ship of Theseus. Imagine a legendary ship sailing the seas of ancient Greece. Over time, its wooden planks begin to rot, so one by one they are replaced. First the hull, then the masts. Eventually, every single piece of the ship is swapped out, no original part remains. And yet the ship still sails. Is it still the same ship? Now imagine that someone took all the old planks that were removed and piece by piece reassembled them into a ship of their own. That ship looks exactly like the original. In fact, it is the original, made of all its original parts. So now we have two ships, one made of new parts that kept the journey going, and one made of old parts that were left behind. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This paradox, simple on the surface, tears open deep questions about identity, continuity, and change. It applies to more than just ships. It applies to you. Your body, like the ship, is constantly changing. Cells and regenerate. Your skin renews itself every few weeks. The atoms in your body are replaced over time. Neuroscientists estimate that the vast majority of the brain's atoms are replaced every few years. So if every part of you is different from when you were a child, are you still the same person? This is not a rhetorical question. It sits at the heart of biology, neuroscience, law, and philosophy. In biology, organisms grow, heal, and adapt. In neuroscience, memory and identity are constantly rewritten by experience. In law, the question of personal identity can affect responsibility and criminal culpability. And in philosophy, it leads us straight into the abyss of what it means to be you. Some propose that identity lies in continuity, not in the material. The ship that kept sailing, even with new parts, is the same because it continued its journey. In that view, identity is like a flame passed from one candle to another. It's not about the wax, but the light. Others argue that identity lies in the parts themselves. If you gather all the original components and reassemble them, that's the real deal. But what if both are valid? What if both are the ship? Then identity is no longer singular. It's plural, fragmented, contextual. The paradox becomes even more intense in the age of technology. Imagine you're in the future. Your mind is uploaded into a digital consciousness. Your thoughts, memories, and personality are transferred into a machine. But your biological body remains behind. Is the digital version you? What if both you and your copy exist at the same time? Which one is the real you? Is it the one with your memories or the one with your flesh? This is not just science fiction. Researchers are actively working on neural interfaces, memory replication, and consciousness mapping. The ship of Theseus lives again, this time in silicon and code. And the answers aren't any easier. Even today in medicine, the paradox finds real-world relevance. Consider organ transplants. A person with a new heart, a new liver, new limbs. How many parts can be replaced before they are no longer the same person? Now consider psychological identity. Trauma, therapy, medication, they all alter the mind. At what point does someone become someone else? There's also a cultural dimension to this paradox. Societies, nations, even languages evolve over time. Take a tradition that changes gradually over centuries. Modified rituals, evolving languages, new customs. Is it still the same culture? Or has it become something else entirely wearing the same name? The paradox challenges the core of how we define continuity. It defies the black and white categories we love to rely on. Same, different, true, false, alive, dead. Instead, it presents a spectrum, a blurry, shifting landscape where identity is a process, not a product. In the realm of artificial intelligence, this becomes even more unsettling. Suppose we create an AI so advanced it develops a self-concept. It begins updating itself, replacing lines of code, upgrading hardware, evolving its architecture. After 1,000 iterations, none of the original code remains. Is it the same AI? Did it evolve or did it die and get replaced? What if it believes it's the same? Does that belief define its continuity? Philosopher Derek Parfit explored this idea deeply. He argued that personal identity is not what truly matters. What matters is psychological continuity, memory, intention, consciousness. If that's preserved, the self continues regardless of what carries it. But this throws a wrench into ethics, responsibility, and personal history. If the self is fluid and replaceable, can it be held accountable? Can it suffer? Can it die? Think also of religion and spirituality. Many beliefs assume a soul, something immutable and eternal. But what if the soul is more like the ship of Theseus, changing, evolving, adapting across lives or experiences? What does that say about rebirth, karma, heaven, or redemption? In literature, the paradox fuels powerful narratives. From Frankenstein to Blade Runner to Westworld, stories explore beings caught between past and present, form and function, memory and material. These tales don't just entertain, they probe the deepest uncertainties of being. So where does that leave us? Perhaps the ship of Theseus isn't a riddle to be solved, but a mirror to hold up to ourselves. It reflects the transient nature of life, the constant flow of change, the illusion of permanence. You are not the same person you were 10 years ago, not in body, mind, or even dreams. And yet you are. The paradox isn't in the ship. It's in the way we define same. Maybe identity isn't a thing at all. Maybe it's a story. A continuity we choose to believe, a path we decide to walk, plank by plank, cell by cell. In that light, the ship of Theseus sails not on the sea, but through time, and we are all passengers aboard. The third paradox takes us to the edge of space, time, and logic, the Fermi paradox. Named after physicist Enrico Fermi, it begins with a simple but unsettling question. Where is everybody? Given the size and age of the universe, the number of stars and potentially habitable planets, and the likelihood of intelligent life emerging elsewhere, why haven't we seen any signs of it? Let's break it down. The Milky Way alone contains over 100 billion stars. Many of these stars have planets. A conservative estimate says there are at least 300 million potentially habitable planets in our galaxy. Now consider this. Earth is a relatively young planet. Other civilizations could have had a billion-year head start. If even a tiny fraction of those civilizations developed space travel, they could have colonized the entire galaxy in a few million years. So, why haven't we heard from them? That's the Fermi paradox, the gap between the high probability of extraterrestrial life and the complete lack of evidence for it. No signals, no probes, no signs, silence. Several explanations have been proposed, but each opens up more questions than it answers. One possibility is that we are alone. Perhaps intelligent life is extraordinarily rare. Maybe Earth is a statistical fluke, a cosmic miracle where biology, chemistry, and luck align just right. This explanation is unsettling but also empowering. If we're the only intelligent beings in the universe, then the responsibility of preserving consciousness falls entirely on us. But many scientists find that unlikely. The laws of physics and chemistry are universal. Water, carbon, amino acids, they're common across space. So why should intelligence be unique to Earth? Another explanation, the Great Filter. This theory suggests there is a barrier, a stage in the evolution of life that is extremely hard to pass. It could be the emergence of life itself, or the jump to multicellular organisms, or the leap to intelligent thought. Or more ominously, it could be ahead of us, a self-destructive threshold that advanced civilizations inevitably reach. Nuclear war. Ecological collapse. Artificial intelligence run amok. The Great Filter could explain why the cosmos is so quiet. Because intelligence tends to destroy itself before becoming interstellar. Then there's the zoo hypothesis. Maybe advanced civilizations are out there watching us, but choosing not to interfere, like researchers observing animals in the wild. Earth is their nature reserve. We're too primitive to contact. This would mean the galaxy is buzzing with life, just beyond our reach. Another eerie theory is the dark forest. It comes from Liu Cixin's science fiction masterpiece, where the universe is imagined as a dark forest full of hidden hunters. Every civilization is a potential threat, so the only safe strategy is silence. In this model, shouting into the void, sending out radio signals, launching golden records, isn't brave. It's reckless, because someone might hear you, and they might not be friendly. Still others propose that intelligent life was out there, but is now extinct. Civilizations rise and fall. Maybe the galaxy had its golden age long before Earth formed. Maybe we're the latecomers, the ones who missed the party. All the empires and super civilizations long gone, their artifacts eroded by time. Or perhaps we're just looking in the wrong way. Our search for extraterrestrial intelligence assumes that alien life would communicate in ways we recognize. Radio waves, chemical signals, spacecraft. But what if they're far more advanced? What if they use quantum entanglement, neutrino beams, or methods we haven't even imagined? What if they've transcended physical form entirely? The Fermi paradox also touches on time. We've only had radio telescopes for about a century. Our digital presence in the universe, our detectable footprint, is barely a blip. Civilizations might rise and vanish in cosmic seconds. Two signals could easily miss each other by 1,000 years. The stars aren't just far apart in space, they're far apart in time. Then there's the possibility that we have been contacted, but we didn't recognize it. Ancient structures, myths, unexplained phenomena. These ideas border on pseudoscience, but they reflect a deep human curiosity, the need to believe we're not alone. The Fermi paradox is not just about aliens, it's about us. It forces us to examine our assumptions about life, intelligence, technology, and destiny. It reflects our fears of isolation, extinction, and insignificance. It asks, are we rare or are we doomed? It also raises ethical questions. If we discover life, primitive or advanced, how should we respond? Do we have the right to interfere, to colonize, to communicate? What if our presence contaminates a pristine world or provokes a dangerous power? On the flip side, if we're truly alone, then Earth becomes infinitely precious. A blue oasis in a black desert, a cradle not just of life but of mind. It places an immense weight on our shoulders to preserve, to protect, to explore. The paradox also inspires hope. It suggests that maybe we're early, maybe we're among the first. If so, then the future of intelligence lies ahead, not behind. Maybe the galaxy is waiting for us to grow, to learn, to build. Maybe we will be the ones who fill the silence. Or maybe we already have. Maybe this moment, this civilization, this fragile digital signal bouncing off satellites and servers is the first voice in the void. And maybe far away someone or something is listening. The Fermi paradox remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in science. It is not just a question, it is a mirror, one that reflects our deepest hopes, our darkest fears, and our endless drive to understand. Because in the end, the question isn't just, where is everybody? It's also, who are we in the face of the infinite? Let's now turn to one of the most confounding philosophical riddles in modern thought, the ship of Theseus. This ancient paradox asks a deceptively simple question. If every single part of a ship is gradually replaced piece by piece until nothing of the original remains, does it still remain the same ship? Imagine a wooden vessel, Theseus's ship, celebrated and preserved by the people of Athens. Over time, its planks begin to rot. One by one, they are replaced with identical pieces of wood. Eventually, every part, every nail, beam, mast, and oar has been swapped out. Not a single original component remains. And yet, to the people maintaining it, it's still the ship of Theseus. But now imagine a twist. What if someone had collected all the discarded original parts and rebuilt the ship using them? You would then have two ships, one made of entirely new parts, but with uninterrupted history and use, and another made of the original materials but reassembled anew. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? This paradox goes beyond ancient ships. It cuts to the heart of what identity really is, of objects, of people, of consciousness itself. Let's begin with physical objects. In modern terms, consider your smartphone. If you replace the screen, the battery, the motherboard, eventually every component, at what point does it stop being your phone? Or consider a famous museum artifact. If every piece is restored or replicated, does the object lose its authenticity? But the paradox becomes truly haunting when we apply it to human beings. Your body is constantly replacing itself. Most of the cells in your body weren't there 7 years ago. Your skin, liver, even parts of your brain renewed over time. Are you still the same person you were a decade ago? Is your sense of self tied to the matter that makes you up, or to the pattern that matter forms? Consider a person who suffers a complete loss of memory. Their personality changes. Their preferences shift. Are they still the same individual? What if a brain is gradually replaced with artificial neurons, identical in function but synthetic in form? At what point does the human become a machine? Or does identity persist, regardless of the material? This paradox is at the core of debates in philosophy of mind, cognitive science, and even artificial intelligence. In the future, we may face this question in terrifyingly literal ways. Imagine uploading your consciousness into a digital substrate, a simulation, or a robotic body. If the upload is perfect, identical in thoughts and memories, is it you or just a copy? And if you remain alive while the copy exists, which one is real? What makes you you? Is it your continuity of memory, your physical brain, your social relationships? Or is identity simply a narrative we construct, a convenient illusion? Even in legal and ethical systems, the ship of Theseus paradox causes complications. If a person commits a crime and later suffers amnesia, should they be held accountable? If a person receives a full face transplant, are they still the same legal identity? These questions are not just abstract. They impact laws, ethics, and our social contracts. Let's take it one step deeper. If everything you are, your memories, your feelings, your sense of self, is just the result of neurons firing in patterns, then could that same pattern exist elsewhere? In another brain? In a computer? In a simulated universe? And if so, are you just a pattern, a process, not a thing? The ship of Theseus pushes us to confront the fragility of identity. It reveals that what we consider constant may be constantly changing, that what we think of as me is a dynamic system, evolving, shifting, aging. It also has profound implications for society. If a person can change entirely over time, then how do we treat long-term accountability? What does rehabilitation mean if the individual who committed a crime no longer exists in any meaningful way? If a body is biologically the same but psychologically different, is it fair to hold it responsible? In metaphysics, this paradox challenges essentialism, the idea that things have a core essence that defines them. Instead, It leans toward process philosophy, the view that existence is defined not by static entities, but by change, continuity, and function. In Buddhism, a similar concept exists. Anatta, the doctrine of non-self. The idea that the self is an illusion, a temporary aggregation of physical and mental components constantly in flux. The ship of Theseus isn't just a Greek puzzle. It echoes across cultures and philosophies. In the end, the paradox doesn't offer an easy answer. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe identity isn't binary. Maybe it's a spectrum, a gradient of sameness and difference, evolving with time, memory, and perspective. Or maybe identity is simply what we agree it is. Maybe the ship of Theseus remains the ship of Theseus because people say it is, because the story continues, because continuity isn't about parts, it's about perception. And maybe that's what defines you too, not the cells that make you, but the story you carry, the choices you remember, the meaning you assign. The ship of Theseus doesn't just ask whether something is the same when it changes. It asks how we decide what matters, the parts or the pattern, the material or the memory, the truth or the tale. And in a world where everything is always changing, maybe identity isn't what survives the change, but what gives the change meaning. Now let's dive into one of the most unsettling paradoxes in logic and mathematics, the unexpected hanging paradox, also known as the surprise execution paradox. It sounds like the plot of a psychological thriller, but it's a real logical puzzle that has baffled philosophers, mathematicians, and even legal theorists for decades. It begins with a simple premise and ends in a mental loop that seems impossible to escape. Imagine this: a judge tells a condemned prisoner that he will be hanged next week on one weekday, Monday through Friday. The execution will be a surprise. He won't know the day of the hanging until the executioner arrives at his cell that morning. The prisoner, desperate to avoid the psychological torture of anticipation, begins to reason through the judge's statement. He thinks the hanging can't be on Friday. If I'm still alive by Thursday night, then Friday is the only day left. That wouldn't be a surprise. So he rules out Friday. Then he considers Thursday. If Friday is impossible, then if I'm alive by Wednesday night, the hanging must be on Thursday. But I'd know that, so it wouldn't be a surprise either. So Thursday is ruled out. He applies this logic recursively. If Thursday and Friday are ruled out, then Wednesday can't be a surprise either. Eventually, he concludes that the hanging can't happen on any day. Relieved, he goes to bed each night believing he won't be executed. But then, on Wednesday morning, the guards come. The prisoner is completely shocked. The judge's promise has been fulfilled. The execution was a surprise. That's the paradox. The prisoner used perfect logic to deduce that a surprise execution was impossible. And yet, it happened. The execution was a surprise precisely because he thought it couldn't occur. So how is this possible? How can logically sound reasoning lead to a false conclusion? This paradox has puzzled logicians for years because it challenges our assumptions about knowledge, prediction, and self-reference. It's a cousin of other famous paradoxes like the liar's paradox. This statement is false, which collapse under their own logic. At its core, the surprise execution paradox reveals a contradiction between two concepts: logical deduction and epistemic certainty. The prisoner assumes that if he can predict the execution, then it cannot occur. But that very assumption is what blinds him to the actual outcome. Let's unpack it. The paradox rests on a meta level of reasoning. The prisoner is trying to reason about his future knowledge. But knowledge isn't static. It's dynamic, based on assumptions and context. By trying to outthink the situation, he creates a self-referential loop, reasoning about reasoning itself. This type of loop is inherently unstable. Some philosophers argue that the paradox reveals a flaw in our understanding of knowledge. Just because something is logically deduced doesn't mean it reflects reality. The prisoner's conclusion is sound within his own logical framework, but that framework breaks when faced with real-world unpredictability. Others suggest the problem lies in the ambiguity of the judge's statement. What exactly does surprise mean? Is it about emotional shock? About failing to logically deduce the timing? About having no prior knowledge at all? If surprise is too vague, then the paradox exploits that vagueness to create confusion. This leads to an even deeper issue. Language and logic don't always map perfectly onto reality. Words like know, expect, surprise, and predict carry intuitive meanings. But when used in logical systems, they can create paradoxes. The human brain isn't built for perfect formal reasoning. It's built for survival, narrative, and approximation. The surprise execution paradox also mirrors a phenomenon in real life: overthinking. In trying to logically control uncertainty, we sometimes blind ourselves to possibility. We assume that outcomes must follow from prediction, but the world isn't always predictable. In computer science, similar issues arise in algorithmic unpredictability and decision-making. If an AI tries to outthink all possible outcomes, it can end up in an infinite loop, just like the prisoner. The lesson? Sometimes the best strategy is to accept uncertainty rather than fight it. In game theory, the paradox has implications for strategies involving incomplete information. If players try to predict opponents' moves based on their reasoning, the loop of mutual prediction can collapse the entire game structure. It's a logic trap, one that breaks down when everyone assumes perfect rationality. In legal and ethical systems, the paradox raises questions about punishment and mental expectation. Is it more cruel to execute someone without warning, or to tell them in advance and let the psychological weight crush them? The idea of a surprise punishment challenges our notions of justice, morality, and human dignity. But perhaps the most chilling implication of the surprise execution paradox is existential. It reminds us that no matter how much we think, plan, or prepare, we can still be surprised. The future, by definition, lies beyond full comprehension. And that's not just a logical issue. It's a human one. In the end, the paradox leaves us with no clear resolution. The execution was a surprise, but only because the prisoner believed it couldn't be. Logic didn't fail. It simply turned inward, becoming a loop with no escape. And that's the hidden power of paradox. It doesn't just bend our minds, it shows us the edges of understanding, where reason begins to fray, where certainty turns into doubt, where knowing too much becomes the very reason we know nothing at all.